I'm starting today with some slides, and these will pop up momentarily, and it features the kind of the kind of pictures that are warm and fuzzy and that we should see at the end of a long, hard day like today. It's students learning in the laboratory, it's welcome signs, it's smiling students in the classroom, and that's what we tend to talk about in these kind of meetings. And more than that, we also talk about this. You know, the great successes that are there, the streamers falling down from the ceilings as the students are lifting their hat to the sky. And that's important, and in fact, if some of you want to come back on Thursday at 12:30 in the same room, we'll be talking in some detail about the Georgia State story and some of the successes we've had. But that's not my main task this evening. It's to talk about what really happens on the ground on your campuses. And one of the reasons we think those days are so special that look like this, celebratory and so forth, is because most days aren't like that. And most of our lives are not successes. If you work in this space, you're dealing with lots of frustrations, the kind of frustrations we just heard outlined by all of your colleagues in this room. I mean, most of the days seem more like this, right? You have this great plan, it's going to be smooth sailing ahead, you'll be at your destination in no time flat, and you get that sinking feeling where things are not working the way you would like and where everything seems to be going wrong. And my urging to you tonight is to take those moments as a learning moment, to really, in a sense, take hold of failure, use it to your benefit, and learn the lessons that you can from it. That's been a central part of the Georgia State story, of actually publicly standing up in front of groups like this, but also just as importantly on campus, in big meetings of administrators who can be very judgmental and saying, here's what's really going wrong. Now, thankfully, we live in a good time for these kind of public admissions of our failings and our embarrassments. This is a quote about how it really is, I believe, liberating when we struggle our lives to always present the best face, to stand up in front of a group and say, here's what's really wrong and really embarrassing. We have models out there in the popular media. Perhaps you're aware of a running bit on Jimmy Kimmel's show called Mean Tweets, where if you don't know the concept, it's fairly simple. He gets his staff to scour social media and find the most humiliating things said about major celebrities, and then he brings the celebrities on in front of a live camera. They don't get to see the tweets in advance, and they're asked to read them publicly and to be broadcast on national television. A couple examples. This is our good friend Zac Efron. Has Zac Efron ever been in a film where he didn't play a total jerk? I had to modify that because the actual word was not acceptable for this audience. I've never seen one of his films. I'm just judging by his face. NBA MVP Steph Curry, star of the Golden State Warriors. Have you ever been downloading something online and halfway through it just froze and couldn't go anywhere? Think Steph Curry's puberty. Yeah, pretty harsh and pretty painful, pretty liberating also to get out in front of a public group and say those things that you're most embarrassed about. And one of the credos of the University Innovation Alliance is we don't expect other people to do difficult things that we are ourselves not willing to do. So this evening, all the presidents have left. I've checked that. No presidents are left in the room. I'm going to engage in a few minutes of the Georgia State version of Mean Tweets. Despite all those wonderful things that Bridget said about me and about Georgia State and some of the good things you may have heard, I must say that on a day-to-day basis, we get a barrage of negative comments and responses coming into us. I thought about this as a good fit for this particular conversation, and so I thought I'd have to go back several months to find some examples, more like a couple days, to find really humiliating things that I've received in just recent weeks. One example is just from last Friday. We launched a new campaign at Georgia State. We call it Pounce Back. Pounce is our school mascot. working with 11,000 students who have stopped out over the last 7 or 8 years to try to get them to come back to Georgia State. And we crafted this whole campaign. We ran the data, screened it to make sure that we wouldn't be reaching out to students who may be enrolled at other institutions or already graduated and so forth. Used the best kind of mindset work to craft a letter. And within literal moments after we hit the press button and the email went out to students, graciously urging them to come back to Georgia State with all the support we could offer, I received this response. Come back. I am never coming back to Georgia State. The 4 exclamation points I thought was a particularly helpful clue to the true feelings of this particular student. I regularly receive the petitions that come up from students for academic relief and other kinds of exceptions from rules. And so a couple weeks ago, I rendered a decision. A young woman was seeking me to waive one of the graduation requirements, and I explained that I couldn't do so. Again, very thoughtfully in a well-crafted letter. She replied back, no surprise, you got it all wrong, Dr. Redneck. I think that was an innocent misspelling of my name. I don't know. The fact that it was throughout her email to me maybe suggests otherwise, but yeah, so I am feeling pretty lofty in the field. And then my third example is from another, what I thought was innocuous and really worthy campaign. We launched an effort with our faculty recently to get them to use open resource course materials or low-cost course materials, urging them to understand that the predicament our students are in. As you heard from President Becker this morning, about 60% of our students are on Pell, and so it's a real struggle for them to put things together. So after that charge went out, I got a faculty member, long-term faculty member at Georgia State, who provided this thoughtful reply. Every day, there is a new initiative that some administrator has drummed up to prop up unqualified students who should not be in college in the first place. It does make you feel kind of warm and fuzzy, doesn't it? I don't know who she could be referring to in this particular diatribe, but I have a kind of feeling that it was directed perhaps at me. So, you know, we talk about these things in all seriousness because they have a serious message. There is something I learned from the fact that a student is so upset with Georgia State that it takes 4 exclamation points for him to indicate how unlikely he is to return again. Or something I learned from the frustration a student has when she gets her petition denied in the way and she responds in the way she did. Or even from the faculty member. We think that faculty members are all on board. It's a good awakening to see that there are faculty members who feel fatigue and resentment of all the change that we've in many ways inflicted upon them. And so the second part of my message to you tonight is that, you know, all these embarrassments, all these humiliations, and all these failures are really opportunities to learn about weaknesses that can and should be addressed. So I'm going to give a couple examples of ways in which we've taken some of our biggest failures at Georgia State, things that are really humiliating in a sense, embarrassing that we've allowed them to go on as long as we have, and by publicly speaking about them, began to see ways beyond them. We, in a sense, for the last 10 years at Georgia State, have been doing an extended exercise in self-reflection and finding ways in which we as a campus, we as a bureaucracy, we as an administration are really the source of a number of the problems that our students face. Let me give you a couple examples. One is this number. Back in 2010 and 2011, Georgia State as an institution, this model of student success, you heard our president say it this morning, was dropping 1,000 students every semester who were fully and duly registered for their classes and wanted to be there because they couldn't come up with enough money to cover tuition and fees. Not a national model in that sense. As we began to really talk about this data and look at it in greater detail, we found some other things that were even more disturbing. For instance, we found that the largest subset of the students we were dropping every semester were seniors. Now, all of you in the student success business knows that that's counter to the common understanding. In general, freshmen are more likely to drop out than sophomores, sophomores than juniors, and so forth. By the time somebody reaches their senior year, they're usually not at great risk. But with this data point, they were the great number of the students we were dropping. And what we began to see is a new problem we hadn't been aware of. As long as we were underperforming as an institution with low retention rates, all those low-income students weren't ever reaching the point of running out of eligibility for aid. Once we began to be more successful in holding on to students beyond the freshman and sophomore and junior year, we began to have more and more students who were running out of the Hope Scholarship. The Hope Scholarship in Georgia, fantastic state scholarship, covers 120 credit hours. You need a minimum of 120 credit hours to get a bachelor's degree. So if you've dropped out a couple courses, you failed one or two, you stopped out a semester because you were working or had a family obligation, you're going to run out of the Hope Scholarship before you reach the finish line. Or Pell eligibility, or student loans. All of these things are tied to a certain maximum number of credit hours or time period. And what we found is increasingly students were running out of funding right before they crossed the finish line. The second thing we found out is many of the students we were dropping every semester didn't know that much. There were hundreds of students in this group every semester who owed under $1,500. So we changed the way we approached this problem at Georgia State, understanding this was an embarrassing failure. We began a program in the fall of 2011 that began to try to address the drop problem. What we did is set up what we call Panther retention grants. They require no action on the part of the students. That's a critical ingredient. If you ask students to come into an office and sign forms and so forth, you're going to begin to self-select out the students who are best positioned and most empowered. So students have to do nothing. We just look at our data. We look at students who are on track for graduation. There's no GPA minimum here. You can have a 2.0 GPA or a 4.0 GPA and be equally qualified for the grant as long as you're doing what you need to progress and get closer to graduation. We look for students with a minimum balance of $1,500 and below, and we just began putting the money in the student's account. First couple semesters we did this, we were calling students up to let them know, don't make other plans Monday morning. We just covered the last $900 or so on your bill. You're good to go for the semester. We had multiple students hanging up on us. They thought it was a scam. They didn't believe anybody from Georgia State had just put $1,900 in their account. That first semester, we helped about 40 students. And since then, we have scaled the program. So over the last 5 years, we've given almost 11,000 of these micro grants out. Average grant about $900. The amazing thing about this program, and the Gates Foundation paid to have Boston Consulting Group and confirm this, it pays for itself. This is a scholarship program that runs in the black because we give students $900. It's covering a gap in their tuition and fees. We immediately get back $900. But the average bill of a student who gets one of these grants is more like $2,600. So we not only get the $900 back again, we get the $1,700 that they had already put towards their bill out of pocket or loans and so forth, which otherwise would be wiped away. So here's a program that is in the institutional interest, and look at what a difference it makes for the students. Since we started this program about a little over 5 years ago, 78% of the students have graduated for an average grant of $900. Where else can you get that kind of return? Last year alone, over 1,300 of the bachelor's recipients at Georgia State were recipients of one of these grants that kept them enrolled and prevented them from stopping out. And if you look at the demographics, this program, although it's blind with regard to race and ethnicity, skews specifically more students benefit who are students of color, who are first-generation students, and who are low-income students. And all of that came from just standing up for the first time and saying, what's happening here, dropping 1,000 qualified students a semester is just not acceptable. That's a failure on our part. Another and second example is this number, summer melt. Back in the summer of 2015, we had a growing problem of confirmed freshmen just not showing up for the first day of classes. This number had grown every year for about 4 or 5 years. About a decade ago, it was about 10% of the confirmed freshman class who didn't arrive for the start of fall classes, and that number grew up to 19%. So again, we stood up and said, let's look at this and say that this is not acceptable, that we're losing almost 20% of the students, not who have been admitted to the university, who have been admitted and confirmed that they're coming. Many of them had come to orientation, had signed up for courses, and that they never showed up for the first day of classes. So we ran a data analysis. We tracked the students who didn't show up for the summer of 2015, who we were expecting to be there for fall classes, a full year using National Student Clearinghouse data. And here's what we found. Most of these students were students of color. Most of these students were low-income students, and that there were almost 300 students in this group who 1 year after doing everything right, they graduated from high school, they applied to college, they took the SAT, they got admitted to college, they confirmed they were coming, in many cases came to campus and signed up for classes. 1 year later, they had not attended a single day of post-secondary work at any institution across the United States. You talk about a tragedy. These are exactly the students who we need to succeed with, and they're literally melting away between the graduation from high school and the start of college at Georgia State. You know, whose fault is that? We again put the mirror on ourselves and said, what are we asking students to do to be ready for that first day of class, fall semester? And we went through and audited, and we found about 14 things that Georgia State expects students to do to be ready for the first day of class. They complete the FAFSA, we all know about that, and no 17-year-old should be asked to do that on their own, but there are things like the verification request. Just as when you fill out your tax forms and the IRS use an algorithm, if your returns don't look like others with a similar background, you're more likely to get audited, so too with the FAFSA. When students submit it, there's a process where these forms are analyzed and certain students are selected for verification. If you're the son or daughter of a middle-income family and your parents file a joint return, very unlikely to be targeted. But if you're a student being raised by grandma because your biological dad is not in the financial picture, bingo, you're much more likely to get one of these verification requests. And what 17-year-old from any background is going to respond in the middle of July successfully to a request from the federal government to show in written form that your grandma is your legal guardian and that your father is not contributing to the finances of your family? And what we found is that a subset of students were sticking that request in their pocket and saying, guess I'm not going to college. Or things as innocuous as immunization requirements. Again, seems like a good public health issue to get students to be immunized before they come to campus, but it was a big differentiator when it came to income level and social economic background, because the middle and upper income students just got mom or dad to send in the records of immunizations. The lower income students, often that was the stumbling block. So for the summer of 2016, we made some changes. We started a new online smartphone survey we deliver to students as soon as they're admitted to Georgia State, where we ask all the questions we would never ask on a college application. Do you have a disability? Are you working? How many hours? Do you contribute to the finances of your family every month? A lot of our students are not only working to pay for college, they're working to still help their family. What courses in high school did you love or hate? So we can begin to direct a much more personalized communication flow to the students all through the summer before they begin official classes. Then we set up a portal. It takes the students through those 14 steps I was just describing, but because it's a portal and students sign on to it, we can see where students are in the process. We used to know that students were engaged and now they're not engaged any longer. Now we know, oh, it was right when we asked for the immunization requirements that the students became less engaged. And then probably most impactfully, we launched a chatbot. A chatbot is an AI-enhanced automatic texting platform. What we did is we built up a knowledge base of about 2,000 answers to questions commonly asked by freshmen. Questions about registration and financial aid and housing and all those issues. We collaborated with a third-party vendor to put it on smartphones so students could text questions 24/7. If the answer was in the knowledge base, they would get an immediate response. We thought we would get maybe 5,000 or 6,000 questions answered to our incoming freshman class in the summer of 2016. In point of fact, we had 200,000 questions answered in that 3-month period. Average response time was 7 seconds. Some students used the tool 40 and 50 times. We could see them texting questions at 3 in the morning. And we knew that our staff, no matter how well we had staffed up and trained, would have never been able to respond in that kind of way. And so did this kind of intervention make a difference? It made a big difference. The difference between summer of 15 and summer of 16, as far as summer melt is concerned, is we held on to 22% more students in the summer of 16 than the summer before, just by these rather simple and relatively low-cost new interventions. What that translates to is about 300 plus additional students who were in their seats ready to go the start of the semester, fall of 16, who would have been somewhere sitting out the college experience just a year earlier. You know, all of this has a human face. We had a visit from Bill Gates this past summer, and he came not to meet the president. He didn't. He came to talk to us about our advising and our technology and our use of chatbots and so forth. He spent his whole time basically with 6 of us, my colleague Allison Calhoun-Brown, who's here, and 4 of the students we selected. We selected the students because they each had some connection to one of the programs we've initiated. So Gabriella on the far left there, she had been a beneficiary of one of the Panther retention grants. Fortune, sitting to her left, was a student who benefited from the advising platform. But you may not guess from that picture which student was at greatest risk of not making it to the point of meeting with Bill Gates and surviving his first year at Georgia State or even being enrolled at Georgia State. It's the young gentleman on the far right. That's Austin. We didn't know this at the time. In fact, we selected Austin because he was one of those users of the chatbot the summer before, rising freshman, and he had used the chatbot about 50 times during the summer leading up to his fall 16 enrollment. But as we invited him to meet with Bill Gates, we began to hear more and more about his story. A first-generation student from Northwest Georgia, his father, career military. After leaving the military, his father ran a fruit and vegetable stand. His mother worked in retail. First-generation college student, very low income. Even by those descriptors, not likely to go to college. But then what happened early in his life would make the odds even more difficult. When he's 13, he learns that his father has ALS, so-called Lou Gehrig's disease. And he starts a pattern for the next couple years of switching off with his mother. His mother takes night shifts, waits till he comes home from school. He goes to school all day, and in the evening, he's responsible for watching his father, who's bedridden at home. And his father passes away a couple years later, and he becomes, as his mother says, the man of the house, the oldest son. But he recounts a moment that was particularly transformative for him. During the late stages of the father's illness, the mother loses or has to step down from her position because the tending to the father is all-consuming. And she's frustrated after the father's death and trying to get back into the job market. And he says, he remembers one night, she's sitting at the kitchen table almost in tears with kind of all her resumes spread out there, and she laments the fact that she can't get it back into the job market because she says everybody who's getting the jobs has a college degree, and of course she doesn't. And so this exceptional young man makes a vow to himself, knowing that the family has very little resources, that he's going to work really hard and get a scholarship so that he doesn't have the same problem his mother has, so that he'll have a college degree and he'll be able to have income. And that's when the chatbot comes in, because Austin does everything right. Amazing for a young man from a first-generation low-income family whose father passes away when he's 14, 15 years old. He works hard. He not only gets a scholarship, he gets the highest scholarship in the state of Georgia. The Zell Miller Scholarship is basically a full ride, covers books, full tuition and fees, and so forth. Fantastic. And then he gets admitted to Georgia State. He comes down to campus for a tour, says this is the place for him. He's excited, he's thrilled, he's got the finances, and he knows where he wants to go. Until he gets his first bill from Georgia State in the summer of 16. And it's thousands of dollars higher than what he was anticipating. In fact, he says he's embarrassed to even tell his mother about it because he knows she'll be heartbroken that this dream he has is not going to be realized, that he and the family just don't have money for him to go to college. And what had actually happened is that his Social Security number got transposed by 2 digits on some form, and this wonderful state scholarship, the Zell Miller Scholarship, didn't get applied to his account. But being the resourceful kid that he is, Austin starts using the chatbot. and he starts trying to figure out what's going on. I'm not going to accept this for an answer. Let's figure out, where this money came from. And over the course of a couple nights, asking a number of questions, he actually figures out what went wrong, talks to somebody in the financial aid office and the state office of scholarship, and gets the issue solved. He tells the story of coming down. He's so happy to have figured it out that he goes down physically to campus with his mother so that they can pay the bill. You could, of course, pay online, but they wanted to be there at the cashier's office paying. And he says his mother was crying, when they paid this bill. The happiest moment of the visit with Bill Gates is when we had Austin, because he had such experience with the chatbot, explain the chatbot to Bill Gates. And Bill Gates was fascinated. He spent 15 minutes asking questions and so forth. But Austin, as he's sitting down, says, sir, I must say, it's rather humbling to be teaching software to you. But, that's the point in my closing thought for this first day of the UIA Summit. There's so much at stake with what we do on a day-to-day basis. And it's great to talk about the big numbers, 29% more Pell students graduating at UIA institutions. Georgia State's graduating 2,800 more students a year than we were 5 years ago. Fantastic. But we have to keep our minds on what's at stake and what's at risk here. The last thing that the students did with Bill Gates before he departed was the requisite selfie. This is Fortune standing there, our SGA president, and you can see there Austin behind as part of that photo. And you think about it, a year before, 22% more students were melting away. Luckily, Austin was there 1 year later and benefited from some of these programs. But how much poorer we would all be at our own institutions if the students like Austin, the students who've done absolutely everything right, in fact, so much more than we would expect even of ourselves, got left on the sidelines. And that's why, what we do on a day-to-day basis is so meaningful and so important. And that's why I'm thrilled to have you here today to not only think about how we can do things better, but to be honest and forthright about what we're not doing right at all. Thank you very much.